Hello, everyone. This is Michaela, and you're listening to the End All the Things podcast. As a life coach and facilitator, I work with individuals and groups to empower their best selves to shine to the betterment of all involved. My goal is always to bring you closer to trusting the voice inside of you that is authentically yours. My job here is no different. In my journey through life, I continue to meet people who use their authenticity, their gifts, to grow, change, and serve through professional and personal endeavors. These people and their stories become my gift to you, for I cannot keep a good thing to myself, and I believe that they may inspire a part of your story to evolve. Let's get ready to take a journey from soil to soul. As you may know, so much of this podcast is really here just to scratch my own itch and let me explore my curiosities. And then when I find something amazing, I love to share it with you. So one of the passions I've been developing since COVID is a passion for plants. Now, I've only been an indoor plant mama, but I am loving these babies and it has taught me so very much. So I've learned about their beauty and their resilience and the way they connect us to something bigger, but I have not stepped outside of that. Literally have not stepped outside to become an outdoor garden mama. So I am very excited to introduce you today to Matthieu Meyhus. He is a landscape architect, educator, and passionate advocate for regenerative gardening and sustainable farming. I mean, how cool and how timely and critical. His story begins on a farm in Belgium and has blossomed into a career that brings his message truly around the world. We cover so much ground in this episode. Yes, that was an intended pun. So we're going to talk about the role of soil's health, the science of regenerative practices, and how small steps can really lead to monumental impact while still having a beautiful, aesthetically pleasing impact on your world around you. So whether you're a seasoned gardener or just starting out, this conversation will leave you inspired to cultivate change in your own life, for yourself, for your community, and for the planet. So grab your gardening gloves, hunker down, and please enjoy this conversation with Matthieu Meyhus and all the things. All right. We have a very special guest today, and it's going to start out with a very special name that I'm going to do my darndest to pronounce correctly, so please let me know if I get it right. But I introduce to you Matthieu Meyhus, or Matthieu Meyhus. So, who is Matthieu today?
Hey, Michaela, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm
My
very
pleasure.
excited, and what a joy to be on your show today. So to answer that question, I'll give you my backstory. So I grew up on a family farm. My brother and my father are farmers. And around the age of 3 years old, probably one of the first memories or one of the oldest memories that I have, is that I got so fascinated about the fact that if you have a tiny little seed and you put that in contact with the soil, that it can grow into a plant or even into a huge tree. Like how on earth is that possible? This was like my first thoughts as a 3 year old. And then by the time I was 5 or 6 years old, I told my parents, hey, because on our farm we had cash crops and cattle, we didn't really have much vegetables or any vegetables at all at that time. And I told my parents, you should imagine like a 5 year old, hey, I want to start my own vegetable garden. Because actually in our school, we had a teacher that was really about teaching us all the tricks about seeding, about cutting, all this stuff. So I came home after school and I'm like, I'm going to start my own garden. Uh, and they were like, they're very busy. Running a farm is like one of the toughest jobs in the world. So they said like, no, we don't have time for that. Um, but I kept on asking. And eventually they gave me a little piece of the garden. And then I started out. And for some odd reason, my first crop that I grew was radishes. And for all the listeners that are here with us today, when you want to start out growing your own food, start out with radishes. It's the easiest vegetable to grow. You put a couple of seeds in the soil, cover it with a little bit of earth. 6 weeks later, you have something to eat. which
And
is amazing.
aren't they bushy, a little green? Like, so they're pretty too, right? Like the leaves and
Yes,
colors. So
yeah, they are. And I think
aesthetically
the leaves
pleasing.
are even edible as well, the young sprouts. So very easy to grow. And yeah, that was my first success.
Hmm.
So I was so proud. We had my first radish together with my mother for a dinner. I was so proud that I grew my own food. And by the way, if you ever experience growing your own food, it's one of the most beautiful things to experience. And I was like, yes, so this is super easy. I'm gonna continue growing all kinds of other vegetables. So I got a bunch of seeds. I prepared my soil. I put in some compost, and without much thinking, I was like putting all my seeds everywhere, seeding them, da da da. And also at that time, my fascination for garden design started because I was arranging my garden. I putting like tiles that I found around the farm,
Cool.
organizing my beds. So I was in love with doing that. And then I was like, okay, my first attempt was so easy, great success. So I just put all my seeds in the soil and was like, I'm just going to come back a couple of weeks later to have all the tomatoes, lettuce, all this stuff. And obviously, you know what happened next. I came back after a couple of weeks. My whole garden was overgrown by weeds, weeds that were taller than myself, because we like our soil is heavy clay soil. So we had together with my grandmother, we had put in some compost to make it more
Okay.
easy but to work with.
And this
But
soil, just for a point of reference, is in Belgium.
yes, exactly. Our farm that is still operating today, my brother is running the farm together with my father, who unfortunately broke his foot this today or the day yesterday. But it'll be fine. We'll have some people to help, or maybe
Good.
I'll have to go and help out. But the farm is actually located in areas that were part of the ocean, what, 1,000 years ago.
Wow.
And then in the 12th century, there were monks that pushed back the ocean. Can you imagine that? In 1200, they were building dikes, draining the land, and creating new soil.
Wow.
And at that time, these soils were also called terra nova, because new earth. So because they like managed to push back the ocean.
That's
So you can,
incredible.
and because it's like, because of the tides that were coming in and out on a daily basis, it was more like a swamp, an ocean swamp or a lagoon. You could
Yep.
compare it to a lagoon. And because of that movement, there's a lot of sedimentation, and that creates the heavy clay soil. And this heavy clay soil is super rich in nutrients, but
Hmm.
it's also very like that's why I had all the weeds growing. It's a very rich soil, but it's also very hard. Like when we get dry spells, it becomes like concrete.
So
And when it
why, I know that we're answering the who are you today question, but so why, we're just going to jump in, and our listeners already know that you work in this field, you've grown up in this field from your bio, but why weeds? Why do weeds grow in that soil that's not super inhabitable?
Nice. Great, 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 awesome question. I was still going to get to that. So I was devastated, right? A 5-year-old trying to grow vegetables overgrown by weeds. And I was like, how on earth is this possible? And actually
Right.
from that day onward, I really tried to understand how nature works. Why is nature sending us weeds? And there's a
Mhm.
specific reason that we can talk about it, because weeds actually tell you something about the soil, about the condition of your soil. And weeds are actually here to help you as a gardener. We can talk about that more later in the episode.
Oh, we're gonna have to, because Americans over here, we are obsessed with getting rid of our weeds.
Oh yeah, and it's throughout the world. It's
Okay.
throughout the world, and even in my industry, people in my industry, landscape architects, garden companies, it's like you shouldn't talk about weeds. It's a
All
topic
right. Well,
that's
we're
not. It's
gonna
like the Voldemort of Harry Potter. It's like you don't say
we're
Voldemort's
gonna
in
say it out
weeds.
loud.
You're gonna say it
Weeds.
out loud because they're actually here to help us. But ever
Okay.
since that moment when I had that, I tried to understand how things work. And then my life continued. I worked across the world in different companies. I had a master degree in landscape architecture. I was working in Saudi Arabia. I did a, a 1.5 year world travel where I visited all of the best eco resorts, farms, because
Wow.
I was fed up with my 9 to 5 job just before that. I was burned out. So I decided to travel the world, got a lot of inspiration from that. And from that inspiration, I founded my own company where we design, create, and and well, mostly design gardens for people that are both very aesthetical, but at the same time have a natural value. Because oftentimes people think if you have a luxury garden, it should be bad for the environment or something, like easy to
Right.
maintain. Or when you have a high biodiversity garden, it looks messy and it's not beautiful. There's like a little bit of a disproportion there.
Mm-hmm.
But in my company, we're bringing it together.
Yeah.
And then I also teach people online how they actually can start creating, maintaining, designing their own garden. And that's been a wildly successful thing. We can also talk about more about it.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell
That's okay.
where
Well, let's crack open the nut. Um, so in all of this, you're blending the idea of this high aesthetic typically means high impact to the earth, right? Like I'm having
Mhm.
my stones shipped from across the continent or
Yes.
whatever, versus this free for all hippie kind of commune mindset, right?
Yes.
How do you bridge that gap, right? Like
Mm.
how do you say yes and? That's one of my favorite sayings in the world. How do we do yes, we'll have this high value, high end aesthetic and this really natural ecosystem, right? Because nature is not organized typically. I mean, in her own way she is, but not in the way we aesthetically like.
Mhm. No, it's a brilliant question that nobody ever asked me this. So thanks for asking that. So how it works is there's a couple things you have to go through. It all actually starts with a very deep analysis. So understanding where your property is. I tell all my clients, my coaching clients, you have to start think like Sherlock Holmes. You become the Sherlock Holmes of your own property. Like what type of soil do I have? Where is my climate? How much rainfall do I have? What is growing in my area? Like you gather as much data as possible. And then a second part is you have to become very clear about your vision. Just like with anything, I think this is part of what you teach as well. When you can see it and you can believe it and you can have that vision,
Hmm.
that's why also we do a vision board of your garden and you really like get clear on how you want it to look, then chances are much higher that it's actually going to happen in that way. So vision boarding or creating
Hmm.
like Pinterest is a great tool to do that
Ah, it's
because
the
for
best.
every yeah, it's an amazing tool because for every person it's different. Like my program is called the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass. So
Hmm.
it's about what is important for you because
Hmm.
there's no value in me coming to you, Michaela, to your garden and saying like, hey, you should put a tree there and you should do this there. It's perfect to have a raised bed there to grow vegetables. And you're like, I
Right.
don't want to grow vegetables. I love flowers. So you have to understand for yourself what makes your heart blossom when you see
I
a
love
garden.
I love this and I just have to giggle because as a life coach, that is the almost textbook by the book. That's
Mhm.
how we function in the world. You know,
Yeah.
what's really important to you, right? Like what do you
What
really
lights
want to
you
get
up?
out of this? What resources are available? Do the data, do some
Hmm.
digging, collect information, and then what is possible and
Exactly.
creating the potential with sustainability, right? Like my sister says to me all the time, "Can you come in and just organize my kitchen?" Just da 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 da.
Hmm.
And I'm like, "I could, but it wouldn't last. You have to create the vision. You have to facilitate how it's going to function for you long term." So when you go to someone, and I shared with you earlier, I'm very new to understanding, loving, and being obsessed, let's be honest, with plants.
Yeah.
All inside because I feel safer that way. But if you take someone like me who has excitement for plants and you take me
Hmm.
outside and say, "What's your vision, Michaela?" I'm going to be like, "Matthieu, I don't know. How do you get into my head? How do you play Sherlock Holmes and help me create the vision that's still my own?"
Hmm. Great question. So it all boils down to, okay, you have to also, actually, I forgot one step before the analysis is that you also understand how nature works. And by the way, it's most of what my book is about,
Oh,
12
nice.
universal laws of nature, how to get the most potential out of your land. So this will help you a lot
Awesome.
to craft your vision once you start to understand like how nature works. Imagine this is me at a 5 year age of 5 year, and now I'm in my early 30s. I gathered all that information and like, okay, the planet is working in a certain way. It's been doing that for millions and millions of years. Like nature works in a certain way. There's a certain harmony
So powerful.
and you can work against it. And this is like trying to kill your weeds, using chemicals in your garden, doing things that don't make sense, high maintenance gardens. Like this is working against nature, and you can do it. I mean, it's not my thing. Or you can start leveraging nature, how nature works, and use that knowledge to your advantage to create something beautiful. So, and then build up on your previous question is also like, okay, how do you actually then do it? Is that once you've created your vision, well, you studied how does nature work, you analyze your property, and already from these two exercises, you're gonna get a better understanding of
Yep.
what you actually want to create. Then you'll build your vision, and then you're actually getting into the actual design. So all of my clients that I teach within 9 weeks, it's crazy, it's only 9 weeks. After week 3, we get into designing, and I explain them the whole process. And something magical happens, and I have that always when I design for my clients. You get into like a nice state, you make a nice coffee or tea, you put up some nice music, you get into like a creative state, and then you just start scribbling, designing, creating. And all of a sudden, your dream garden is right in front of you on paper. And it's really important to make a plan, because you could also just go outside and start digging some plants.
Right.
And that's what most people do. They go, and there's again nothing wrong with it, but it's very costly and not effective. They go
Right.
out to the garden center in springtime. They buy a bunch of plants that look appealing.
Right.
And by the way, these plants are grown in these greenhouses with a lot of chemicals, with a lot of like they're pushed
Right.
to be looking beautiful. Once you've put them in the ground in your own home, they often die there, and it's
Right.
not like what you want to
The
create.
conditions are different. They're not getting that supplemented growth from the
Yes.
greenhouses, which is certainly something that we're going to have to talk about. But I think you answered the question of not only who are you today, but how do you get into the head of someone like me who, I live in New Jersey in the United States. If I plant a palm tree outside, I'm likely to have problems. But to have the curiosity and to have the space to say, I would love a palm tree, and then to have someone help me build the potential of what else, what other tree, how else could it go, like what would give that effect and not die immediately, which is not good for the earth, and good for my spirit. Like if I'm going to do this, I want to do it right. So I
Yes.
think it sounds like what you are is like you're a nature's intuitive, right? Like
Mhm.
based on science. Because if
Mhm.
I don't, you really understand the science of these things. This
Yep.
isn't just aesthetically pretty. That's how you're bridging the gap. You're taking the
Mhm.
aesthetics, you're taking the science, you're taking the spirit and the joy of it, and you're pushing it forward. And then you're giving us tools on how to do that for ourselves.
Mhm.
Unbelievable. I want to say that I think everyone has the potential to be some kind of a gardener. If I can
Yes.
turn this thumb into whatever gnarly, desiccating thing that it was into
I
something
agree.
that's rather green today, I think anybody can.
I always
Um,
say there's a gardener in every one of us.
oh, that's good. There's a gardener in every one of us. I want to jump back in time real quick. Tell me about that radish. What did it taste like? You said it was a really excellent experience, and to grow it, to seed it, to grow it, to enjoy it. What did it taste like? Can you remember?
I think it's hard to remember the actual taste other
Sure.
than when
The
you're a
flavor.
kid and you eat radishes, they're very spicy, right? And you have to like, I remember when I eat radishes, you actually have to eat them fast. If you chew on them too long, they become very spicy.
Okay.
So that's what I remember of it. But mostly what I remember was how proud I was to
Mhm.
show my mother, like, hey, look, like you, and this is for kids all across the world. They go to the supermarket with their parents, they see like things are growing there. Like I
Yeah.
remember as a child, I grew up on a farming community with all of our school. A lot of my friends were in the farming industry, and then we would go to like a convention to learn about farming. And we had some other kids from other schools that are in the urban areas, and we would do. I still remember this clearly. We would do a workshop around food to
Hmm.
understand like what how why farmers are important and what efforts they're doing. And I remember there was like a box with mashed potatoes, you know, the dried one,
Yeah.
the highly processed one.
Yeah.
And they would ask us in that workshops, we were like kids of I must have been under 12. Like, where do you think this comes from? And all the kids from the city said, obviously it comes from the supermarket. And we're like, we're from the farmland. We're like, no, these are potatoes. They come from the soil and the farmers grow them. So kids don't, in urban areas, kids don't even realize that. So for me, that you grow up in a family, you have your dinner, you get food is served for you, and all of a sudden you can be part of that process of providing
Right.
something for your family. I think it's one of the most beautiful experiences.
Oh, and thank you for that. That's kind of, I think, where I was heading with the question. There's several threads I want to pull. I want to pull on the urban thread in a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm going to pull on the at the table, the community, you're proud, here's my radish. When I think of that today, I think of how that radish would taste as opposed to the one I bought at the grocery store,
Mhm.
right? I think about how flavorful, how nutrient rich that radish was as opposed to what I buy at the grocery. I've eaten radishes. I don't know that I've ever eaten a whole one, but I've never had it burn,
Yeah.
right? Probably not the freshest. And you're
Mhm.
talking about the plants and how we support and help them grow faster and more beautiful in our
Mhm.
greenhouses because we're a capitalist society.
Mhm.
But I grew up in farmland, New Jersey, if you can believe
Mhm.
that. We are the garden
Yes.
state, despite all the other things that we host. I don't know how much you know about Jersey, but I'll fill you in on that later. But we are the garden state, and I live in a county that is very agricultural, but it's known for it because it's so unique in today's world and in New Jersey. And I remember 12 years old going around like, if we're the only ones in New Jersey making this corn and making this wheat and making all this stuff, how is the rest of the world eating?
Mhm.
Right? And that's when I got curious and I started finding out about GMOs and all the ways that we mass produce. And I'm like, why would we do that when we have all this
Mhm.
land? So, how did we get here? How did we get to this place of diminishing the soil, the nutrients in our food, the our environment? How did we get to this place so fast and so furiously?
Yeah.
Because what I believe is that the food we're eating is killing us on a
Mm.
lot of levels.
Yeah.
Um, so after that long preamble, any thoughts?
Yes, I think it's a great question to really understand like where have we come from? Like you can look at today and be very pessimistic about our food system and other things, but it's good to take a step back and look at it from a bird's eye perspective.
Right.
So to do that, we have to go back to the Second World War. Before the Second World War, most of the food didn't have all the Actually, it started First World War,
Mm,
um, because what happened was that imagine First World War, they were doing a lot of chemical warfare.
mm,
And here actually in Belgium, they were doing chemical warfare, which is very nasty. So then the First World War ended, like obviously we had some time between, and then Second World War ended. And then what happened in the 50s and 60s was what they called the Green Revolution. So right after the Second World War, there were huge famines. People didn't have enough food. Well, throughout the whole wartime, it was very hard to get to get any food. So what happened after the world wars ended? Most of the governments were like, "Oh, we never want to experience famine again. We
right.
know how devastating it is." So they figured like, how can we resolve that? And they had all that excess chemicals from the world wars that were like they had already produced them to do
Wow.
warfare. War's over. It's like, what are we going to do with it? They started experimenting with a lot of the chemicals to put them on plants, and they saw some crazy results. Like nitrogen was used in bombs and all this stuff, and all of a sudden
Wow.
they're deploying it
So
into
let me be clear.
farmland.
The same chemicals, elements, compounds that they were using as chemical warfare a year prior or whatever were
Hmm.
now being used on our agricultural. produce. Okay.
Yes, there's a bit of a transition. It already started at the end of 1800. They already had some knowledge about it, but there wasn't a demand for it because there was adequate food. But then the two world wars destroyed a lot of it. And they had the famine. So they were like, okay, we never want to experience that again. And it's quite ingenious in that way. And again, it's always important not to blame anybody, because what would you do as a government when people had famines? We want to mass produce, so we never have to experience famine again. And they saw some crazy results with applying all the chemical fertilizers. Like plants were growing double in size. Then all of a sudden we also had the introduction of the tractors. Like I remember a story of my grandfather talking about his father, saying that some guy came to the farm to sell some kind of equipment that would be better than horses to work on the land. And my grandfather said, no way, that's impossible. I own the best horses in town. Like my horses are like so good. And they said, well, we'll come and show you. And they showed the tractor on the field what it could do and how it could plow the land. Next day, my grandfather sold all his horses, and it went very quickly. And then adding in the chemicals, the yields would double in quantity. So people were like, wow, this is a magical solution, right? So it became very fast introduced into the chemical production system. And then something else happened, which is actually more recent, like the whole Monsanto glyphosate, the chemicals that's actually used to kill the weeds, became introduced. It started in the 70s, but at that time they used it only to spray and kill everything. So you would have like in between crops, you just spray and you kill the weeds. That was already not the best solution. Already, even in 1800, some like Rudolf Steiner, maybe you've heard of the Steiner schools and similar to Waldorf. He was already alarming it in the 1800s that we're getting in a difficult situation. But anyways, it was only in the 70s, 80s that it was introduced. And then only in the 90s, so that by the time I was born, they started to experiment with the GMOs and the actually plants that are not necessarily GMO, but selected to be resistant to the Roundup, to the glyphosate. And that changed everything. So in the last 30 years, glyphosate became widely used because as a farmer, you're growing your crop, you spray it over your crop, and the crop that you want to grow stays alive, and all the rest dies. So it's like just looking at that from a perspective of innovation and how genius it is, it's amazing. We don't have to lie about it. But now we know the science that how devastating it is for the soil, for the waterways, for our personal health. It's destroyed a lot of things. Like I always refer to this, the biggest example of that is that now in Texas, they're building, or they're finished building, a high-rise building for children with cancer. Like what has happened to the world that we now have to build high-rise buildings for children with cancer? There's something wrong.
They're popping up in many cities in our country, and
which is devastating. But
it is devastating. And I want to go back. You said it earlier. You said, but there's hope, right? Because now my waterways, my body, my everything is being infiltrated by these chemicals that, again, to go back, were used in chemical warfare not so many decades ago. And I will be honest, I have been a little judgmental about that. How could you? How could you? But when you lay it out in this way of the next most right thing, the next most right thing,
exactly.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions, but we are still finding ourselves in hell, right?
Interesting.
So we talked about, how did you say? We eat to self-help, eat to save the planet.
We can eat ourselves to health and eat the planet healthy.
Awesome.
So you're right. Like I love the way you said, like, there's no point in blaming what the past generations have done. In fact, the past generations have created a world where famine practically doesn't exist.
Right.
There's still famine, and it's in areas, in certain areas of the world that either are so devastated by climate change, and that's even a relative small percentage. Most of it is related to conflict, to wars.
Right.
So without the wars, there's no famine, pretty much. And I don't want to sound like generalize it. There's still people
No,
that are
but
suffering hunger, but we have all the tools
we have the tools and the
to
means and the
get,
resources to live in a world without famine and hunger. Do we implement them? No, right? Like
well,
you walk streets in most cities in the world and we're seeing homelessness and that own form of famine.
yep.
But by and large, again, let's just go
Hmm.
general. We are not living in a world where you and I face a famine. So we don't need to live with that high frequency of fear, which was a legitimate fear.
Yep.
So how do we shift that, right? How do we eat to save ourselves? How do
Yes.
we eat to save the planet? Basically, Matthieu, how do we save the world?
Yeah. I love this question. And it's the day I realized, I was like, oh shit, we're onto some big things here. But
Do tell, do tell.
the way to answer that is like there's good news, there's hope. And this all ties back to how nature works and how resilient nature is.
Yeah.
Like even though we've pushed nature into quite an angle, nature is very resilient, robust, and we can restore it very fast. We don't have much time, but there's still time to do it, because as we've destroyed it in a relatively short time, we can restore it even
Yeah.
faster. So, and the
Okay.
way to do
That
that
is
is,
super hopeful because that's not what you're going to hear in mainstream media.
no,
And I
that's
know that we're
doom.
in different countries with different medias, but it's all really the same.
Yep.
Um, Maybe not as grandiose as ours, but we don't get that message, right? So we
No.
live in this world of all of, everything's going to shit,
Hmm.
and there's really nothing you can do about it. We're just going to build more houses, build more high
No.
rises to solve the problem.
No. And then, yeah, that's very dangerous to stay stuck in the problem, because whatever you give attention grows, right? So
Yes.
getting into the solutions, I'll explain it in the way as good as I can. So it all ties back to the soil. Soil, the fact that we can live on our planet has to do with the soil and water. And what happens under our feet is such an amazing
Mhm.
revelation that, in fact, we know more about what's happening in all of the universe around us than what's happening under our
Hmm.
feet. But the science is starting to pick up what happens under our feet. There's something called microorganisms. So microorganisms are super important for a healthy planet, for you to be healthy as a person. And you'll be amazed how connected we actually are to the soil. And
I love this.
what happens under our feet is, so the microorganisms, and just by the way, just for people to understand the magnitude of this, so 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, so healthy soil which is not has the which doesn't have the chemicals which been treated well, can have more microorganisms than there are people on the whole planet. So that's already in the billions in 1 teaspoon. So it's a highly complex system where there's a lot of interaction between microorganisms and the plants. So
Okay.
how it works, just for the science to understand, and then we can we'll go very small in scale, and then we will go very big in scale.
Great. Thank
So
you.
imagine we become like a millionth the size and we go into the soil, right? There's the roots of the plants, and the roots of the plants are just like our own stomach, but they're inside out. So imagine that the roots of the plants are our stomach, but just inside out.
Okay.
And the same as in our own stomach, the microorganisms, which science is now actually proving that a lot of the modern day diseases, cancer, diabetes, they're all related to the lack of microorganisms in your
Mm.
stomach, or yeah, they all boil down to that, because we have so much chemicals in our system that the microorganisms die. And what the microorganisms do, I'll explain it in our gut. And the mind-blowing thing is that it's exactly the same in the soil.
Mm.
So in our gut, you eat hopefully healthy food without the chemicals. The microorganisms will take those nutrients and they slightly change it. They will eat it, they digest it, and they make it available, bioavailability. They make it available for your stomach to absorb all the nutrients, the vitamins, everything. So that's what microorganisms do. Now, bringing it back to the soil, it's exactly the same thing. And it's even so mind-blowing that plants need different minerals, nutrients, just like ourselves, they need it at different moments in their life. So, for example, plants need a lot of nitrogen at the start of their life. Nitrogen is like explosive growth. It's a lot of green growth. So the plants even communicate. This is like science from this year. They've only started to realize this now, that the plants communicate with the microorganisms and they're exchanging. It's like a big, you could see it as a big stock market. So what
That is
happens is
interesting. I've got some extra nitrogen. Who needs it?
exactly. So it's exactly how it works. So the plants will say, "Oh, now I need nitrogen," and how they communicate it is still a mystery. But they will tell it to the microorganisms, "Go get me some nitrogen,"
Right.
because a plant can't walk. Okay, it can grow its roots, but then it's also not necessarily bioavailable. That's what farmers are struggling with a lot. They have the nutrients in the soil, but it's not bioavailable. The plants cannot absorb it because of
Because something else is lacking.
because the
Right.
microorganisms are lacking because they're spraying all the chemicals that destroy like Roundup destroys everything. It's like antibiotics for our own system. And I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. In some cases, you might still want to use it. If you're very ill, you should also get antibiotics,
Right.
but know that it destroys everything.
Yep.
So that's to be considered with it. And in the soil, so the microorganisms get the nitrogen, they pretty much make it bioavailable for the roots. And what do the plants do? They give something in exchange. So Michaela, do you remember still from biology class, how does photosynthesis work? What's happening?
So I'll sing you a song. I
Yes,
mean, I can't
please.
believe I'm going to sing on a recording. Seventh grade, I do not have the kind of brain that like quickly recalls things. I have basic ideas, but my teacher made us learn a song. Here you go. Photosynthesis, it is the process in which green plants, in the presence of light, using chlorophyll, CO2, and water to make simple sugar stored as starches.
Exactly. You said it. Wow, how cool is that song? I need you to
I just
send me
sang.
that.
Holy crap.
But what was one of the last? That's so good. Congratulations. So nice. You sang a song on the podcast. So
I'm a
what
little
was one of
embarrassed.
that's okay. What was one of the last things you said in your song?
To make simple
Da-da-da.
sugars stored as starches,
Yes, simple sugars stored
using,
as starches. I don't even know what starches is, but I
I don't
presume
know.
that's like glucose, which is
Yeah,
it's actually a
sugar.
healthy form of sugars because we tend to also think that sugars are bad and we should ban sugars. Well, it's the refined sugar because foods
Correct.
are still very healthy and they're full of sugar. But so the plants produce sugar through the process of photosynthesis. They absorb carbon dioxide, which is good for our environment. They produce oxygen. We need that to live. Great
Hmm.
thing. And they produce sugar. And who gets the sugars? The microorganisms, because the
Right.
microorganisms need sugars to live.
To live, they feed on it.
So
Okay.
you can imagine there's like a huge stock trade of plants giving microorganisms sugars to live
Yeah,
and
I
microorganisms
like that.
giving whatever the plant needs at whatever moment in time.
Talk about
So
asking your neighbor for a cup of sugar.
it,
Um,
exactly, that's it.
so the soil then, the ideal soil is going to be super rich in these biomes and all the things.
Mhm.
And if the nutrients or the nitrogen's not getting there because of the chemicals we're putting on the soil,
Mhm.
how are our plants still growing, right? Like, because they're growing, but they're lacking the vitamins, the nutritional
Yes.
value. Like, what happens there?
Well, like I said, which is incredible, and it's into our advantage, but also a bit in our disadvantage, that nature is so robust. So even if we're using all the chemicals and even if we're doing it, let's call it not in the right way,
Hmm.
nature still is able to grow. So in this, let's call it the industrial complex farming system, you grow plants, whenever the plant needs nitrogen, you spray nitrogen,
Got it.
and nitrogen in a liquid form is like it's just too crazy that this is being produced because you need to burn fossil fuels
Mm.
to
To
absorb.
make it?
Yeah, so the way there's a specific
Wow.
system, engines are running, they absorb
So
nitrogen
to
out
be
of the
clear,
atmosphere,
to
and
do the
then
most
farmers
natural
spray that.
thing we have to spray it with something that requires the consumption of fossil fuels, which come from our natural resources. So
Yes.
we're depleting the earth to grow anyway, I think you get it,
Yes.
right?
So
Like
yeah,
it's so
that's synthetic or synthetic or chemical nitrogen that farmers are using widespread, and it's since the war in Ukraine, the price of that is actually like exploded,
oh wow.
which in my opinion is a good thing because farmers are going to start to rethink how they use nitrogen. Because the crazy thing
Right.
about it is that nitrogen is in the atmosphere and it's abundant in the air. Even in the air that we breathe, it's full of nitrogen,
Right.
and plants can absorb it as well. So we're spraying it to give it to the plants, but plants can actually absorb it themselves. But they can only do it when
When the
well, they can
biome.
only do it efficiently when they're in their healthy state, when they
Hmm.
have all the microorganisms and all this. So it's a bit of like a, what do you call it?
A vicious cycle.
Chicken, yeah, chicken and the egg thing is like,
Yes.
okay, you would want to farm naturally, but you're stuck to the old system.
Yep. So how
So
do you
there's
shift? So what's the answer? Like, your family's farm is a restorative farm,
yes.
right? Like
So the answer to that is what's called regenerative farming.
regenerative.
And what's in a word, right? Regenerative farming is just a way of saying, okay, we're gonna farm more in harmony with how nature works. We're
Yep.
gonna tap into the natural processes of how nature works, and we're gonna stimulate it by certain methods. And some of the methods that I also teach in my masterclass for gardeners, because again, it's the 12
Hmm.
universal laws of nature, they apply to
Right.
anything,
Whether you're doing cash crop farming or
or a
aesthetically
small backyard garden,
beautiful
it's still
landscape
the same.
design.
I
Okay.
mean, obviously there's different implicacies
Sure.
on the systems and the infrastructure, but
Right.
the natural process is the same. So how can you then the next question would be for your listeners is, okay, how can I actively do that,
Yeah.
either as a farmer or in my own backyard? Well, the thing is, you need to find a way to produce these microorganisms, because even if your soil hasn't been like sprayed a lot, and by the way, if we tie it back to the gardeners, the garden and landscaping industry, similar to the farming industry, is also full of chemicals, and
Yeah.
the whole landscaping industry doesn't want you to be successful. And again, they're not meaning that, it's not like they're evil or something, it's just the
Mm.
way they've been doing
They
it
want you to
with
come
the
back and buy
chemicals.
another bush in a couple of
Exactly.
years.
That's it. That's the business model. Uh,
Mm.
they don't. So again, they're not doing it on purpose,
Right.
but they don't have any benefit. The contractors,
Yeah.
even some of my colleagues, I could say, but I can't generalize that. There's no benefit for you to become successful at gardening,
Hmm.
because you don't go back to the garden center. You don't need the nitrogen
Right.
fertilizers. You don't need all of this stuff.
And then you don't need to go to the grocery store as much, and it becomes this,
Yes.
it's like deep breathing in the world of health, right? Pharmaceutical companies don't want you to do deep breathing. They want you to take a pill for your anxiety.
Mhm.
And it's what I appreciate about how you're presenting this. And you can hear there's a little judgment in me. I'm like, we need to take better care of our earth and our bodies. And
Mhm.
I so appreciate the balanced perspective of this. They're just doing what they're doing, not because they're bad people, but this is the system they're in based on, again, those really good intentions. So I so appreciate that you keep bringing it back to taking out the judgment, whether
Yes.
it's the Monsantos of the world or I don't know, whoever
Mhm.
else we want to bastardize here. But what I also appreciate is that all of these things are affecting it. You said the war in Ukraine. I keep thinking of we had a 90-day drought here in New Jersey and in this area very recently. What is the effect of that? How
Mhm.
there's so many things coming at us that we
Mhm.
cannot control.
Yes.
So what's one strategy, whether in your business or whether you're dealing with, the seeds you want to reap down the road? How do you manage all the noise? How do you manage the stress and stay in that place of non-judgment? Let's focus on the solution, not the problem.
Yes. That's another great question. So the way to do that is, first of all, you have to like define for yourself, okay, do I want to purely provide healthy, nutritious food for my own family? Okay, good. Then you should start getting into gardening, farming, gardening, growing your own food. But obviously, we all have our own jobs and we're passionate about what we do. So you can't not necessarily become like a homesteader and or become
And
completely
if you can, great,
self-sufficient.
go do it.
Yeah,
But but
same
maybe not
thing.
all of us.
I agree. When you can do it, wow, beautiful, do it. I have a bunch of friends. They're living off the grid. I visit them. I love what they do. I support
Yeah.
them, but it's not for everybody. So then what I highly recommend is I tell this to everybody, just Google regenerative farm in your area.
Mm.
So regenerative farm, New Jersey. Go do some research. Very soon you'll find people that are actually are so passionate about farming in the right way that you should take your car, drive to them, and buy whatever products you can. Like a lot of them are producing, whether you eat meat or not, they're making amazing products. Like my brother, we're doing a regenerative grazing chicken for eggs. So we have like a
Awesome.
mobile hen house. This is like, you could imagine a mobile
Yeah.
home for chicken, and we
Yeah.
move them around on the pasture land. And so they always have fresh grass, they can eat
I've seen
insects.
those.
And
I think that's absolutely brilliant, right?
yes,
Why build a fence and cage them in? Just keep them moving and they'll cut your grass for you, you know?
mhm,
Um,
exactly. So
and they're
then,
constantly
mhm.
defecating and going to the bathroom and doing all the things. So that gets into the soil. And as gross as that sounds, it's still part of the process, right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
still part of the natural occurrence in our soils. And you said a word in there that I think probably also helps you to close down the noise, but it's passion. Your passion, not only from from a child to now, but to keep planting the seed, to see what can grow, to see its potential. Not every let's gardener, farmer turns it into a business,
No,
right? It's hard to balance both, I imagine, but
no, it's not actually. Farmers that are farming regeneratively, they're the best. Well, farmers in generally that are still operating today,
yeah,
I'm telling you, these are the best businessmen on the planet because
if they're
farming
still
is the
operating.
toughest business there is. And they're
Hmm.
so passionate about their job that they're still doing it, even though it's super hard. So the farmers that are still active today, a lot of them stopped, got bankrupt. A lot of
Yep.
suicide in farming, actually. It's one of the highest rates of suicide as a job across the
Ooh,
globe. So a lot of them have given up on it. So if you ever talk to a farmer, you can be very respectful and grateful that he's still in
absolutely.
business. And then the farmers
You
that do
have
get
such a
into the,
beautiful perspective. Thank you so much.
it's a pleasure. So and then the regenerative farmers, they're businessmen as well. So,
Hmm.
but the thing is that their product today with the current food system, it's more expensive. It's changing and there's getting better ways to do it. So these farmers depend on people buying straight from them
Hmm.
because in the whole food industry, there's all these middlemen, the traders, the
Yep.
supermarkets, and they all have their place again. But when you can buy directly from the farmer, you know that he will get most of the profit, so he can keep
Yep.
doing the way he's farming. So
Well,
there's also
and
like online shops where you can buy regenerative food.
hmm,
So that's one thing you can do. And then I'd love to talk more about what, even if you can't access that, because in some places of the world it's still difficult or it might be out of your budget for now, there's still other things that you can do today in your own environment. So I'd love to talk more about that, but you wanted
absolutely.
to jump in for a question?
No, I wanted to comment again. I live in an agricultural area, and there's farm stands all over. And when you said buy direct from the farmer, I went directly back to that's how you eat to save yourself and eat to
Mhm.
save the planet, right?
Exactly.
Even if I can't go build my own regenerative, garden,
Hmm.
I can still contribute to the people who are doing that on
Yeah.
behalf of the economy, the agricultural industry, the environment, all the things. So I just wanted to jump in with that because I can't get that idea out of my mind. Like, I think I eat well to save this body and to do, to live a strong, able life. But I love to think about it saving the planet. Um, I have questions about your thoughts on the animal industry, right? Because
Hmm.
that can be an opposing force sometimes, and I don't
Yes.
believe it, but it can be an opposing force to agriculture or
Yeah.
like farming
Yes.
from the soil.
Yes.
But you guys do both, right? Your family, the
Yes.
animal and soil.
Again, it's a very important topic to bring up, and not many people dare to talk about it because, and the people that do talk about it, they're so, let's call it extremist in their
Yes,
perspective.
you're
Like it's
right.
all of, you have to either be like a vegan, or you have to be a vegetarian, or you have to be like
Hardcore
meat eaters.
carnivore.
There's like, I still remember a year or two ago, there was like outrageous podcasts where people were like beating themselves up about like, you have to be vegan or you have to be a meat eater. And
Please don't
both
tell
of
me
them
what I
are
have to
actually
be.
wrong. Both of them are wrong because, or not wrong, they're actually both right as well. But
Hmm.
it's not about what you eat, it's about how it is produced. So there's this
Hmm.
famous saying that I didn't invent it. It's not the cow, it's the how.
Mm.
So how is a cow? What is a cow? A cow is from nature, like thousands of years ago, before we started domesticating the cow, they were grazing animals. They were living in big herds, grazing the big plains. Like in the US, it's the buffalo in the US.
Hmm. Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, that was like, they were like huge herds roaming the plains, and they were actually an important part of the ecosystem, sustaining the land, because most of these lands you can't actually grow, you can't make it into a forest. It was the cattle that maintained the grassland because they graze it,
Wow.
they leave their
Yep.
manure, they fertilize the soil, and they continue to move on. They're always moving, these big herds. So
Well,
that's
just like the
how,
chickens in the portable coops, right? Like
exactly.
there is a relationship between them and the earth.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that's what you do in regenerative farming, especially when it comes down to animal growing. You mimic that.
Hmm.
So there's this thing called regenerative grazing. So when you look that up, there's an amazing TED talk by Alan Savory. It's already 10 years old. I think he's explaining it brilliantly, or he's the man who kind of discovered it, that for a lot of areas of the world, especially the drier environments that have now become deserts, it's because we thought like animals are bad for the environment, so they took them away. They took them away out of the nature reserves, or out of the farmland,
Right.
and then they turn into deserts because it's the cows that maintain the land. So, and then
Mm.
you could still, from an ethical standpoint, that's a decision you have to make. If we have these animals that graze the land, you could say, okay, we'll let them graze and they'll die naturally, and then that's it. Or you could say we're gonna harvest them and make it a source of protein for us. And
Hmm.
they've been living a beautiful life, roaming the land, and you can be specific on what animal to take out at what point. And then you decide that for you. You want to live by that standard when you eat meat, when you
Right.
eat an animal that's lived a beautiful life, or not. And that's both is fine.
And I thank you for that. And I have had people on the show who are hardcore on both sides, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I've personally had this experience of I eat mostly vegetarian, but I really don't want to I don't want to not eat a piece of bacon if I want it. I love chicken, but not every day all the time.
Yeah.
Um, so I will throw in there's this lovely word that my friend Ella, hardcore vegan and very
Mhm.
passionate, she's an advocate, but she said, Michaela, you could be a flexitarian. And I
Mhm.
was like, what?
Of
And I just
course.
thought it was great because that means I get to choose. If my vegetables are crappy and, not very full, I might choose the chicken or choose something else, but I
Yes.
get to choose. And I like thinking about where they came from because what's the obstacle with all the chicken and the pig and the cow farms is they have no purpose. Their only purpose is to stay there, get fatter, and to be slaughtered. But what I like about where they're living in existence, they're contributing to the earth, their purpose is clearly defined as a
Mhm.
participant in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then their life gets further purpose driven by bringing the nutrients from the grass, right? Isn't that where our cows get most of the good for you things that people want to eat?
Yes, it's sun. It's actually sun energy. So you can't actually get more sustainable meat when the grass is grown by the sun, and that
Oh.
produces the proteins. the sunlight.
The cows.
So if you get regenerative grazed meat, you're actually eating sunlight. So it's a very sustainable way of eating meat.
I just like the idea of eating sunlight.
Exactly. And a lot of the farmland of the world can't be used for cropping. There's mountains, there's slopes, there's soils that are compacted or too dry to grow other stuff. And grassland is a huge benefit for that. And what I still want to add as well is that even in your own lifetime, just like the plants where we started, we're like, okay, a plant needs different nutrients at different times or different cycles in its life. For example, when it's growing as a baby, or when it's bearing fruits as becoming a mother, you need different nutrients throughout your life. So maybe at some point in your life, you might be a vegan because you need more greens.
Right.
At some other point, you get back to meat or you stop meat. Like it's all your own choice, and you have to find out what works well for your body. Like I've been vegan for 1.5 years because I was traveling the world. And that was the good choice because I couldn't be sure about the sourcing of my meats, and I wanted to try it, and it kind of worked for me. But then I still felt I need some more protein, so I got back to eating meat. So there's no right or wrong in that whole perspective.
No, and I think that kind of sums a lot of this up. There is no right or wrong. It's just what's the best we can do with what we have when we have clear goals. If the goal is mass quantity of food, great. But if the goal is quality of food, that's a different choice, right?
Yes.
So, and we cannot live in the decisions that were made based on the needs of the past. We have to live here today. But I'm so grateful that you have this hope or this vision that we can fix it. If we if we are so rapidly destroying the earth that we can rapidly repair it. And we can do it in our backyards, we can do it across the globe. So here's really, I think, one of my last questions.
Well, I just want to add for the science to get people become really hopeful about the future. So the science says that if half of the farmers change from the industrial model to regenerative, and it's happening fast because of because of climate change, because of the cost of the old system, and it's kind of falling apart. But if half of the farmers change to regenerative farming, we can, because when you do regenerative farming, you're doing that photosynthesis, right? So you're getting all the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that are out in the atmosphere into the soil. So that's how this concept or this notion of carbon farming is becoming a big deal, part of the regenerative farming movement. And we can reverse climate change within 7 years. So we can get to carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere that are pre-industrial revolution within 7 years. If half of the farmers, or when half of the farmers jump on the bandwagon, and it helps them because they'll become more successful. They keep their sovereignty. They're not dependent on external inputs. So
and we save the
win-win, and we save the world, and we have more healthy, nutritious food.
So we need to get that to the G7 and get them to to understand that information and to make that change, because I want this world to be a thriving, vibrant place for my kids and their kids and kids and kids and kids. And I do have worries and concerns for that. So to speak with someone who is so rooted not only in the science of it, but the experience of it and the legacy of it. I mean, you're a great granddad, right? And probably beyond. So if you could give one word of advice or one action item, and then I want you to tell us how we can find you in your masterclass, but what would you say to people today? What tip advice would you say if you could have the attention of millions?
Yeah, I think I said it already to start with. You could find out where you can source your own products, but then at the same time, when you feel like and when you have the ambition, and I do believe that there's, like I said, there's a gardener in every one of us, that you should start gardening. Like now we talked about how good it is for the environment in the farming system, but if you as a person start to garden in your own backyard, that soil that is full of microorganisms, you're going to be in contact with that soil. And it's also, the science is now proving that our skins can absorb those microorganisms and they can heal our gut and brain health, because both our gut and brain are full of microorganisms that are the same as the soil. So
Yep.
start gardening in whatever form you want. Like, for example, if you like to grow vegetables, go and do it. But if you're like, well, I don't want to grow my own vegetables, like for my mother is a great example. She doesn't like to grow vegetables. She only grows flowers, and she actually has a business. She's a flower farmer.
Awesome.
She's growing a lot of them, and that's her passion. And she's doing it regeneratively with my support. So whatever you want to do, and I clearly guide people in finding that for them. That's I think the main message I could give. Start gardening, and you'll
Get your
see
hands
your
in some dirt.
exactly, and you'll see your health increase, because one family member once said that whatever problems you have in life, whatever things you're struggling with, go and work in your garden for some time, even if it's a half an hour or less, and you will find all of the solutions for your problems. And there's something to say about the mental health, and it's clearly linked to the physical health as well because of the
Yep.
microorganisms. But doing something in your garden, it gives you an accomplishment, it gives you like a good feeling. Even the research shows from the blue zones of the planet. I don't know
Yeah,
if
I was
you,
just going to bring that up, that just the movement and the carrying and the up and down and, ooh, sorry.
yes, so the blue zones, they have the oldest people in the world, and a super important part of their lifestyle is gardening.
Yep.
So the benefits are endless. You can provide healthy food for your family, your children.
Yep.
Like if you can't source the food that is from other farmers, you can do it your own.
Yep.
And there's
That's
proven systems that I teach it's called what I call it regenerative gardening. And it becomes super easy. It's like crazy when you get into it, where you work with Mother Nature,
yeah.
and you don't have to be scared of the weeds. Because I think we could talk we probably have to do another episode, but the
I
weeds
know. I was like,
actually
I
give
want to
you,
keep bringing up the weeds, but I have a feeling it's going to be a long conversation. But from
we'll
what
have
I
to pick it up.
gather, just to kind of wrap it up, weeds are like indicators, they're symptoms or something, right? Like, so if there is a
Exactly.
weed growing, it
Yep.
means that something is lacking or that the
Exactly.
environment needs something. And yet, we do nothing but pluck, pull,
Hmm.
remove, extricate.
Yep.
And I think we're going to have to talk about this another time because I do not want to take all of your afternoon.
Oh,
Um,
I'm fine. We can go a little longer if you
all
want to go
right,
there.
well, tell me a little bit about weeds.
Okay, let's go into weeds. So again, we have to start learning from nature. How does nature work? In nature, or in our gardens, we like to have or in old, let's call it old conventional ways of gardening, we
Right.
like to see bare soil. Like a bare
Right.
soil is like a status
Raw,
of a
natural.
nice maintained garden. But the problem with a bare soil is that it never happens in nature, or at least it doesn't happen for a very long time. So if we look into nature, a bare soil only happens after a landslide or a big wildfire. So it's relatively rare.
Mhm.
And then because nature is so robust and it's been working in a certain way for millions and millions of years, the first thing that Mother Nature sends out to restore the health of the soil, because when you turn around the soil or you keep it bare, you're actually destroying the soil. It's like our skin. If you keep it open, if you have a wound,
Mhm.
it gets infected. So it's not like what Mother Nature wants. It wants to
Right.
have the soil covered. So now imagine this: Mother Nature has decided that the first plants that it sends to you to restore the health of the soil are the things that we call weeds. And in fact, weed is just a very nasty word for annual plants. So annual plants have the capacity to restore the health of the soil,
Huh.
and they all have they come for specific reasons. And maybe it's similar how we come into life, that we come into life for a specific reason, and we resolve certain things. And just to give you like one
True.
example, we have the plant dandelion. It's the
Mhm.
beautiful yellow flower. It's, by the way, it's edible and it's super nutritious. And you'll
Yep.
get to understand why. But it is a weed, because if it's overgrowing your garden, you can't grow anything else. So you need to find a way to control it. But every weed has a story to tell. So this specific weed tells you that your soil is compacted, that it's lacking some nutrients, or that there's also or that there's too much nitrogen in your soil.
Okay.
So compaction. So that weed will stay in your garden as long as that problem is solved. So even if you plug it out and you think like, oh, now I got rid of it, it'll come back because it hasn't fulfilled its prophecy. So now we can help the Mother Nature to restore itself faster. There's certain techniques to do that. There's certain tools to decompact the soil. When you add some high quality compost, which high quality compost you can either grow it yourself. It does have some signs and you need to study it, or you can get it from a regenerative farmer. That's why you want to go and find them and ask them to buy some of their high quality compost. You put that into the soil and nature will resolve itself. And then another thing about that, and that's also why it's such a healthy plant to eat. It's full of those nutritions, minerals, because it has a super deep taproot. And it can go up to 6 meters into the soil and find all kinds of minerals and bring it up to the surface and
Whereas
improve
most
that.
other plants only go so far.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So
So,
weeds have that story to tell. And then one of the principles of regenerative garden is, okay, you don't want to have bare soil. So you need to find ways to keep
right.
the soil covered, either by growing as much plants as you can. Mulching is a great way of doing that. So that's pretty much the story of weeds. And I feel like I could talk about it for another hour.
Well, I just think it's so interesting. Again, the way you can bring the perspective of what many perceive as not good, injustice or bad decisions or a weed can be framed with information, with awareness and education into something meaningful. And they are beautiful flowers, and I don't mind them in my yard, but a lot of people do. And I think we spend a lot of time and money and chemicals to remediate something that we're solving for the wrong problem.
Yep.
And I find whether it's gardening or life or love or business or whatever, people tend to be solving for the wrong plot problem. And I like how you play Sherlock Holmes, but you do it with this science mindset. And like I mentioned earlier, this particular connection to the legacy of, you know, 3 years old, you saw a seed grow into something magnificent. And I love the way that you're doing that here in the world today. So if you could be hired for the design process of a garden, someone's personal or professional garden, anywhere in the world, where would you want to? Because you've traveled, I think you've been to all those like eco resorts, which we'll have to talk about again later, but where would you want to design a garden? What would be like your Taj Mahal?
Well, I think I've already reached my Taj Mahal because I have clients in 4 continents.
Oh my gosh.
So we're reaching from Australia to the US, Canada. So there's already a lot of things happening. And still, my heart is quite a lot in South Africa. I still feel there's something there. But before going there, there's another episode in my life. I'm actually moving to the Azores this January. So it's still 2024 whenever this episode gets
Wow.
launched. And January 2025, I'll be on the islands in the Azores because it's something amazing about that place that has drawn me to go there. And I already have 2 clients there, and there's more in the making. So yeah, it's also beautiful that I have my online coaching or training program, masterclass, that I get to connect with people across the globe.
Awesome. So if anyone listening wants to be a part of that, or follow you along as you transition to your new climate, geography, and soil, where can we find more about you, the book, the masterclass? Catch us up.
Yes, so I'm on most social media platforms. So I have my personal Instagram profile where I give like daily garden tricks and hacks and some of the knowledge that's already in my book. Then we have our Paulonia landscape architects. Uh, that's the business profile, also on Instagram. That's more like the one-on-one clients where we come in for them, we do everything for them, and we create this beautiful, luxurious but high biodiversity properties. So that's also on Instagram. I'm a bit on TikTok now these days as well. You can find me there. LinkedIn is more for like a B2B project. So because we're also designing a company Like we're working on a big rooftop garden for an office building. It's going to be like a
That's
really
something
big.
else we didn't get to talk about that I
No,
hope
there's so much happening there, and then when it comes down to the website, you can order my book on my website. It's 12lawsofnature.com, or you can also, since last month, you can find it on Amazon, 12 Universal Laws of Nature. Then when people feel like the urge to start their gardening journey, I do have my website. That's www.gardenofyourdreams.com. And there, when you leave your email, you can get access to a free training. It's about 30 minutes, and it gives you a good taste of like how I teach, and it gives you already some immediate advice on tools that you can start using and some easy to grow plants. So there's some good value there. And when you feel like you immediately want to start and you're like, I can't wait. And even when it's winter, I'm telling people winter is the best time. People think like, oh, winter, I can't do much in the garden, but it's actually the best time to start because you need to prepare and you have to make a plan. One of your former presidents, I think it was Lincoln, but I'm not sure, said when you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. So you need a solid garden design. You need a plan. You need to like put your thoughts on paper, because it's going to save you a lot of money when you do it in that way. So start with the free training, and if you feel like getting in soon enough, you can book a 30-minute training with me. And that's also on the website, or you can use Calendly to book a meeting with me, and then I can run you through the whole program.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been super packed with information and insights and perspective. And I really do fashion this show to highlight the gifts that come in other people and how they use them in service of others and to the greater good. And you, my friend, are nailing it. I think that the direction you are taking your vision and that 3-year-old and that 6-year-old and all those ages in between and turning it into something that solves your problem, which is pursuing your passion, and solves other people's problem while saving the earth. I mean, come on. Like, that's a life well lived. So I applaud you. And again, I'd like to start and stop with gratitude. I'm really grateful for your time today and the way you've chosen to show up in our world. And I just thank you. This has been awesome.
Thank you very much, Michaela. And maybe I have one idea. I'd love to hear your perspective on it. Should we do a giveaway of my book? Is there a way that
Absolutely.
whenever somebody reaches out to you by email or whatever, the first person gets a free book?
How about I will put a link in the show notes to like some kind of Google form, and we can first person in gets a book, and I'll send you their address and keep
Yes,
it very
exactly.
simple. That'd be
Let's do
awesome.
that. Yes,
Oh, I
I'd love
love
to
a
do
good
that.
giveaway.
Fast action
Um,
is rewarded.
what if my name is first on the list? Does that count? No.
Uh, I'll send you a book anyway.
I'm just kidding. I would love to see that in the hands of some of our listeners because while I am not yet outside with my green thumb, I want to go there. And it's about, to our point earlier, it's about getting the data, getting an understanding of if I'm going to go outside with my green thumb, what do I need to know? What's the baseline? What's the basics? And how do I make it not hurt this dear and beautiful planet or my dear and beautiful children? And you've given us a lot to think about towards that end. So thank you so much, Matthieu.
Yes.
And thanks for welcoming us into your family, your legacy, your story, and all the hope that you hold for our collective future. So
Thank you.
thank you so
It's
much.
been a joy to come here, Michaela. Thank you very much for your great questions.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm grateful to have a space to indulge my curiosities. And to everyone out there, wherever you're off to today, I hope you make it a great day. Thanks so much. And that's a wrap on another episode of And All the Things. If you enjoyed today's show, please like and follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you really liked it, please go ahead and rate it. Then think about who in your life might also need to hear it and any of the other episodes we have shared. Then share it with them. When you find something meaningful, something valuable, you've got to share it and pay it forward to those you care for. Thanks for joining us, and follow along on Instagram at MyJoyCoach to see more of me, your host, Michaela Burdyshaw. And as always, make it a great day.